That stake right there is where we already have a primary wire installed, and that goes out to the pole. We did that like 2 years ago, and so now we're ready to finally hook it up. For anybody that's watching that is an electrician, just forgive my terminology in this video. This is geared towards the average viewer. So when I say things like wire and I really mean conductor, or if I say wire and I really mean cable, or just various other things like that, just know that I'm doing this so that I don't have to make people think twice about what I'm saying. Before I start this work, I want to explain that I am a licensed electrician. The power company here requires you to keep the transformer within 10 feet from the road, and you also need to maintain that so that they can access it. So it needs to be plowed, it needs to be mowed, trimmed back, whatever you need to do. This spot here is a little over 10 feet. It's probably like 15 to 20 feet by the time we're done from the road. But my dad is gonna actually expand that road this way. That rock right there is where the road's gonna be. So this will be about 10 feet from it when it's done. So if you can't get within 10 feet, you have to kind of make another little road that goes to it, and you have to maintain it. But for right now, what I want to do first is just dig for the post that I'm going to put in. I'm going to put in 2 4x4 posts. Some companies will allow you to get away with 1 post, and it needs to be a 4x6 minimum. But I just like to do 4x4s, 2 of them. It holds pretty strong. Just get 8-foot pieces, and instead of digging the holes individually, you just dig 1 hole with the excavator. So I'm coming up out of the ground with schedule 80, like this, going to the primary transformer here. And then I'm also going to have an expansion coupler. When you're putting these in, you have to expand them first to about the midpoint. Inside of these, they just have 2 O-rings with a bunch of grease, waterproof grease. And you just want to make sure it's about midpoint, which is that mark right there. You also want to make sure that this is facing down like this, because if you have it up, then the water can just sit in there and it can freeze and crack this. or just leak in it. So another good idea, if you're going downhill with a pipe like this, you don't want to trap water in there because there's going to be water eventually all over here. So what I like to do, if it's going downhill like that, I'll drill a hole at the very bottom just to let all the water out. When that elbow comes up, wherever the lowest point is, you drill a hole. Four and 2/0. On these meter combination pans, they always want you to come in underground on the left, and they give you this kind of channel here for it. And then in here, which once the power company puts a meter on there, you won't be able to get in there anymore, but let's take a peek in there. So your wire comes up through here, and then this is going to be a hot, this is going to be a hot, this is going to be your neutral, and then your ground ties right next to it. The outgoing power, here's the neutral, here's the ground, here's the neutral bars, here's the 2 hots, and they have room for, I think it's 8 full-size breakers or 16 mini breakers. And this is the main breaker, 200 amps, so that turns on everything here, and then from here you can have more sub panels. So everything beyond this point is a sub panel. This is the main panel. When you come out to a house from here, that main panel in the house is actually a sub panel. When you're running conduit from one place to another, the code allows you to have up to a 360-degree radius on the bends of the pipe. So in this case, from here to here, I only have 190, and I have nothing over there. I used to put a 90 there, but the power company told me don't even bother. So I only have 190, so I have quite a bit left to go. And that allows you to get the pipe over where it's right next to whatever you're fastening to. If you already have too many bends in the pipe, then you can't do that, because they actually consider this to be 2 45s together. So that's a 90-degree equation that you need to add to it. So in this case, it's fine to use this. I got plenty of leeway of that. But if I already had too many bends, then I wouldn't be able to use it. And then you just kind of pack out whatever you're going against, and then you don't need to use this. But in this case, we'll use it. To get these things tight, it's a lot easier to just hold the nut with your hand and then turn the pipe. You get a lot more leverage on things, so that's nice and tight. I did have an inspector one time tell me that I do need a bushing on there, and I was under the assumption that if you're not using metal pipe that you don't need this bushing. But you know what, sometimes it's just easier to just comply with it, especially on small stupid things like that. Because I ran it over with the excavator. To make things easier to put this wire through, I always take this guard off first. You can always put it back on when you're done. It always looks so much better when you wipe down the joints. This one I got to a little bit late, but usually if you wipe them down right away, It's easy. Now I can backfill this. I can put this channel back on. There's an antioxidant compound on this, on these bigger connections like this. You definitely need to use it when you connect aluminum to copper, but the inspectors like seeing it even in the main connections in these panels. They like seeing it there. Try to loop this as much as you can, the widest loop possible, because as things expand and contract, that wire will move, and you don't want it to be tight where when it moves it starts stressing things. It's hard to kind of line things up. Just loosen this all the way up, and then you can slide the lug. Now you can just lay the wire in there and put the lug back on top. So this last one I want to come up and around, because you don't want to attach it like that, because then there's no loop there. So, and you can't just make a really sharp bend on it either. So you got to come up and around like this. So my dad doesn't have his house built here yet, so there's no outgoing electric. But usually that would go right here and it would get connected to these lugs. And that's after this 200 amp breaker. So for right now, I'm just gonna install a utility panel inside of one of his sheds. So now let's talk about grounding. So from this panel needs to be grounded with 2 ground rods. What I like to do is come 6 feet out with the first one, and then from there another 6 feet to the next one, and there needs to be a continuous loop between them. Normally the power company around here will let you get away with 6-gauge solid wire, but I actually like to use 6-gauge stranded wire. Pretty much every panel I install is going to be the same way. I need 6 feet to the first one, 6 feet to the second one, and roughly a foot each. So there's 14 feet, and then I need to come up the panel. So I just dug this all the way down to bedrock. You can see I'm 3 feet down at best. So what I'm gonna do is take this ground rod and I'm gonna make a bend on it. See, so now I can bury that. That's sticking up just about where it needs to be, which really you need the connection on top of the ground so that you can inspect it. So I'll put this one right here, and I think up there I'm gonna put another one 6 feet away from this one, going that way. There's just a ton of junk that I'm finding in the ground here. Nobody ever knew that it was here. So I'm down to bedrock here too. So now I'll just lay this flat just like the other one. And you always need to make sure that they're 6 feet apart from each other. All right, I got about 300 feet of ditch in. It really only took me about an hour, so about 20 minutes per 100 foot, which is about average. I've seen it take an hour for 50 feet if it's really bad conditions, but then I've also seen it be like 15 minutes per 100 foot, so it totally depends on the conditions of the ground. And I even had some frozen stuff in here too, but with that trenching bucket it's no big deal. See, over here is all rock, but you have a lot more digging power when you have a narrower bucket. You only take out half as much, but you take it out twice as quick. So because there's a lot of rocks here, we're going to be doing a lot of backfilling by hand, just enough to cover the conduit, and then after that we'll backfill with some of this stuff. But sometimes it's a good idea to get some gravel, but right now everything at the gravel yard is wet, so it got frozen, so just big chunks of stuff, so I'm not even going to bother with that. Sand is hard to come by around here. They have to ship it from another county. They don't have sand in this county, so sand is pretty expensive, so I almost never use sand. You don't have to if you are using conduit, so that's always the way that I go. I never do a direct burial line without conduit. It just doesn't make sense to me. The conduit is cheap insurance. It just makes sure that you can replace it in the future with no big deal. Plus it protects it a lot more, and you don't have to go down as deep, because it's 24 inches that you have to go down if you don't have conduit. And it's important not to put that glue inside of the female end. Only put it on the male end. Otherwise it'll shove the stuff up in there. Yeah, just do the whole thing and lay it right in there. I'll work on burying this end. An easy way to take these out is you start in the middle and you get the first one, and then you keep working your way out. And since they have 2 tack welds on them, what you can do is bend them back and forth, and it breaks those tack welds within like 3 bends. So you take this one out, it just flops over. The second one has 2 tack welds, so you kind of teeter-totter it on those tack welds, and then you can it'll easily break that tack weld as soon as you do that. And you just keep working your way out. Again, when you tighten these up, you hold the nut and you turn the fitting. And you'll find that you have so much better leverage doing that than to try to turn that with like your fingernails. That's just ridiculous. And a lot of times people will use a screwdriver to tighten this up, but you're just like banging things around for no reason. You can easily get this as tight as it can be. I talked to the power company about installing this transformer, and they said they really don't want to do it until I move that big rock out of the way. So I guess I'm just going to start out with 2 machines. I know it's going to need at least that, and then if I have to, I'll put a third one on. My dad dug that out of this hole here, which is the start of his foundation. He had that one boulder, and then he had another one, and we actually had a guy up the road that had a huge backhoe that he came over and rolled it out of this hole. And then he said he was going to take the rock, but he never did, so it's kind of in the way. So I guess we'll get that out of the way now. So we could probably get it with those 2 machines, but rather than put all this stress on them, I'm just gonna take this. My brother's gonna come out and help us. I'm gonna pull a string through this conduit. So on this side, I'm gonna put the vacuum. Once you feed the mason string through, then you just pull this string through, and you got a lot more pulling power with this. So you use this to pull the wire with. So here is the utility panel. This is an incoming breaker, 15 amps. And then I have two arc fault, ground fault combination breakers. So you would need ground fault anyways, like a GFCI. So for a few extra dollars, you can just get them arc fault. Anytime that you're working with a place that somebody's gonna be sleeping or potentially sleeping, you want arc fault breakers because a fire can happen in the middle of the night and you wouldn't know it. I can get into all this technical stuff in later videos. This video is just kind of installing the service. We still have to finish up wiring the shed, but just make note that this is a sub panel or a utility panel. What you have to do is also run a grounding rod or a grounding electrode, and that's for really, it's for lightning purposes because you already have the ground coming here anyways. If you were running just an outlet off of that meter and you're coming over here without the sub panel, you could get away with not using a ground rod over here. But anytime that you're going to another structure, you have to have a ground rod if you're putting a sub panel in. Really, the whole purpose of this was to give my dad the ability to plug in like a cell phone, maybe a laptop, and maybe a small refrigerator. If you really need some actual power, then this is not the way to go, because I use 12 gauge stranded wire, and at 300 feet, the voltage drop is pretty substantial when you're using more amps. So in other words, if you were trying to get a full 15 amps, the voltage drop would be quite a bit. So you could ruin some electronics by doing that. I did the voltage drop calculations, and this is probably safe to about 10 amps After that, the voltage drop gets below the point where you want to risk plugging in some electronics. So inside of a sub panel, after the main panel, which is where the meter is, you cannot connect the neutral and ground anymore. You have to separate them. So in this case, this one had no ground bus, so I actually installed one. And you don't want to bond the neutral to the panel. So you only bond the ground to the panel. All right, I just came here and these guys were hooking this up.
7,620.
7,620.
That's coming in on the left.
Okay. So there's my outgoing wire right there on the right. On the left, that's the primary wire coming in. So that's what it looks like. And there's the meter on 0. So this has got power now. My dad's house is going to be down there. It's going to be about 100 feet away. So probably just use some 4-aught. It's got 2 hots at 4-aught, and then it's got a neutral at 2-aught. And that one is actually going to have a ground in it. It's going to have a ground conductor. And also, when he builds the house, this is kind of a new thing that not a lot of people do yet. But when he builds the house, when he puts in the foundation, I'm going to put a 20-foot stick of rebar in there that's tied to something called an oofer. And that's basically in place of a ground rod. It's actually a lot better than a ground rod. So I've been starting to put those in on the last couple projects. They make it a lot easier to work with, plus they're better too. And really that ground is really just meant for lightning, because you already have the ground come from this panel, which comes from the 2 ground rods that I put in. So I gave my dad a little outlet here. GFCI. This is weather resistant and tamper resistant. That's the code for that. And so inside of here, I just have the 15 amp breakers going to the shed, and then this one is the outlet. So that's all I have for now. It's really nice to have this installed before you do any construction on the house. I can't tell you how many times I've done projects that I had to run a generator all day, and that just gets really old. So, transformers installed. This has got like 50 gallons of oil in it on this side. So in closing here, I could get a lot more into detail on some future videos with electrical, but just know that I'm not like a full-time electrician. To me, it's kind of boring to just do one thing your whole life. So I do like doing electrical, but really what I got my license for was to do electrical work on my own jobs. I really have no interest in becoming a full-time electrician. I like switching it up. I like doing different things. So doing one thing like that is kind of boring to me. It's also hard having a fully stocked truck of everything that you need, which is usually what an electrician would have. And I do have a lot of electrical stuff, but I don't always carry it with me in my trailer. I just carry the basic stuff that I need. I never did any commercial electric. I'm not really interested in doing that. I just do residential electric, 200 amps or less, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. I really have no intention on going full-time into it and getting a lot more into it. I just do it for my own projects, because otherwise I gotta hire somebody to do it, and I'm just not into hiring any subs. I just don't use subs at all. When I take on a project, if my company can't do it directly in-house, then I don't take it on. I don't even want it. If this was a customer's meter, I would cut these off level and put a cap on them, and we'll eventually do that, but this is just to give you guys an idea of what goes on with the service. To give you a little background story for this, I have done electrical work for a long time when I used to live over in Dutchess County, and you didn't need a license over there. As a matter of fact, they didn't even have one unless you were in like the city of Poughkeepsie or the city of Beacon. Other than that, there's no other place in Dutchess County that you need a license. So I never got one until I came over to here in Greene County, and you need a license for the entire county here. You can't do any work without it. So I took my master electrician's test, and I got one in Greene County, and I also have one in Ulster County. So once you take it, as long as you keep up to date with your insurance every year and you renew it every year, pay the fee, then you can have it for life, and that's where I'm at with it. So if you guys learned something with this video and you want to see more electrical videos, I wouldn't mind doing a couple more. My dad has a video about making the shed. If you guys are interested, I'll leave a link in the description. But this is made out of all sawmilled lumber. He also made this stove too. This is all homemade. It's even got a ashtray in the bottom. This is pretty thick steel on this too. This is not like one of those tiny stoves or the mini stoves that are made out of like 16th inch steel. This is pretty heavy duty, and this is a perfect size for this place.